And in comments recorded by Lauren Windsor at the Supreme Court Historical Society's annual dinner earlier this month, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito offered his assessment of the political and ideological struggle in America.
I don't know that we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. I think that it's a matter of winning.
I think you're probably right. I think one side or the other is going to win. I don't know. I mean, there can be a way of working, a way of living together peacefully, but it's difficult, because there are differences on fundamental things that really can't be compromised. Really can't be compromised. So it's not like we're going to split the difference.
One side or the other is going to win. Now, heard in a vacuum by someone, those comments may not seem particularly striking. But remember, Samuel Alito is one of 9 justices on the Supreme Court, the highest court in our country. It is supposed to conduct itself with utmost fairness and impartiality in interpreting our Constitution and adjudicating the laws. And one of its justices, Samuel Alito, you just heard him, is telling a stranger at a crowded event that he believes that one political side is going to win, that there is no place for compromise. And for anyone who's followed Alito's time on the court, it's no secret which side the justice believes he is on. Look at just the past few weeks. I mean, Justice Alito has refused to recuse himself from a January 6th case and the Trump immunity case currently sitting before the court, even after reports that his homes displayed flags with right-wing political symbolism, including an upside-down American flag in the days after January 6th. Alito, who has built a reputation over the course of years as being tough on crime and generally unsympathetic to criminal defendants, also voiced a newfound empathy, is the only way to call it, for January 6th defendants of all people and Donald Trump during oral arguments in 2 cases. I mean, take, for example, the case of a January 6th defendant. Alito questions the Justice Department's use of an obstruction statute to prosecute people involved in the Capitol attack. He suggested, this was his argument, that if the court doesn't intervene, prosecutors could also seek to use it against people involved in peaceful demonstrations, like those that take place in a courtroom from time to time. Of course, we all know a peaceful protest is clearly not at all the same as people smashing windows and doors to invade the Capitol and causing members of Congress, and never mind the Republican Vice President of the United States, to flee for their lives. And in the face of multiple ethics scandals we've all been talking about involving undisclosed gifts from Republican mega donors to members of the Supreme Court, Alito has been unapologetic, telling the Wall Street Journal late last year that, quote, no provision in the Constitution gives Congress the authority to regulate the Supreme Court, period. Look, fairness and impartiality in both appearance and action are the principles that judges are supposed to follow, especially in the highest court of the land. And at least at some point, Samuel Alito knew that. Take a listen to an answer from his confirmation hearing back in 2006.
Do you believe that there is any room for a judge's own value or personal beliefs when he or she interprets the Constitution?
Judges have to be careful not to inject their own views into the interpretation of the Constitution, and for that matter, into the interpretation of statutes. That's not the job that we are given. That's not authority that we are given.
It's not the authority we are given. That's not the job we are given. I mean, Alito knows, or at least knew then, what his job entailed. And despite all of his actions and statements, he also apparently can't stand those who claim he's not living up to those standards. As he told the Wall Street Journal, quote, everyone is free to express disagreement with our decisions and to criticize our reasoning as they see fit. But saying or implying that the court is becoming an illegitimate institution or questioning our integrity crosses an important line. See, Justice Alito wants to be revered as an impartial judge who, just calls balls and strikes as they're supposed to. But as this new tape and his time on the bench have shown, especially over the last several weeks and months, he's actually more of a player, actively engaged in one side's struggle to win. So he's given us every reason to expect this from him, given all these actions. That also doesn't mean it's something that we should or need to accept.